AM560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. President Trump on CNBC yesterday asked about 2028 and always enjoys the opportunity to troll the hysterics in the D.C. press corps, so he did again.
Unless I run again.
Are you going to run again?
No, probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
And you're not going to fire Jay Powell. We'll go all talk about all the stuff that.
Hey, Becky, I'd like to run. I have the best poll numbers I've ever had. You know why? Because people love the tariffs, and they love the trade deal, and they love that foreign countries aren't ripping us off anymore. For years, they ripped us off, friend and foe.
Oh, they love the tariffs. He'd love to run again, but that is trolling too, because Ducey, that would be Peter, asked him about 2028 and who the front runner was, and Trump, in a less jovial and more analytical moment, had this to say.
The heir apparent to MAGA is J.D. Vance.
Well, I think most likely, in all fairness, he's the vice president. I think Marco is also somebody that maybe would get together with J.D. in some form. I also think we have incredible people, some of the people on the stage right here. So it's too early, obviously, to talk about it, but certainly he's doing a great job, and he would be probably favored at this point.
So let's dispense with this Trump running in 2028. The Constitution prohibits it. And so, yeah, got it. Okay. Get to the other part. The tariffs that have been imposed. People love them. Nobody's ripping us off anymore. We're getting these trade deals done. The greatest economy. You know the argument. But there is this court case that is running concurrent to the trade deals that are being negotiated, or frameworks for deals that are being negotiated and celebrated. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit heard oral arguments last week in the case, and there's no indication when it will issue a decision, and so the tariffs are in force pending that decision. And regardless of the outcome, since you've got a dozen state attorneys general combined with some small business interests that are suing the federal government, this is likely to go to the Supreme Court, regardless of how the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit decides. And at issue here is whether or not the IEEPA gives the president the power to do what he has been doing, the imposition of tariffs and the negotiation of these trade deals. This is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act that he's operating under, which provides the president the power to address, quote, unusual and extraordinary, unquote, threats during national emergencies. Trump argues that trade imbalances, declining manufacturing power, and the cross-border flow of drugs justifies the tariffs under this statute. This is why you hear him invoke, Mexico or Canada not doing enough to stop the flow of fentanyl into this country, in addition to talking about trade deficits and so forth. For more on that matter, maybe a couple others, pleased to be joined again by Professor Richard Epstein, James Parker Hall Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of Law and Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago. Professor Epstein, thanks for being with us.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Dan.
So the IEEPA, what is your view about whether Trump is acting, whether or not that statute gives Trump the authority to do what he has been doing?
Well, I've been strongly opposed to the president on this issue from the beginning. The key feature, you have to find out what counts as an emergency. And what Trump says is everybody is ripping us off. And so, therefore, there's been a 100-year emergency. First of all, he's crazy to assert that everybody's been ripped off and that somebody goes back to the same deals over and over again. They're losing money. And the best explanation is they're not losing any money. If you look at any particular transaction, the buyer wins and the seller wins. Otherwise, they don't make it. And somebody who's a buyer in one transaction starts to be a seller in the next transaction, offered to somebody else. And so the deficits are no information about anything with respect to the way in which markets work. What they do is there's a net deficit coming into the United States, which means there's more investment here. It doesn't mean Chicken Little or the sky is falling down. So he's 100% wrong on the question of that. And the use of the language about ripped off seems to indicate that though everybody in a private transaction is making money, somehow when you put all these pluses together, you come up with a giant money. Secondly, he got a very bad reception when he went to the court. They essentially said, look, we do not understand how it is that a president can completely disrupt an entire system that has been put together by tariffs, done by the president, done by Congress, under very orderly rules. You're just a wild card in this particular situation. And while you may have some degree of discretion on how to respond to an emergency, including perhaps the use of tariffs, although it's been done only once, you have no discretion whatsoever to announce that something is an emergency when it turns out that it's not an emergency. And what he has to do is to explain why these are rare and unusual circumstances, the language of the statute, when it's been going on since 1934. I don't think he could do it. Now, the argument on the other side is that Trump just gets complete discretion on everything. And the argument is that, in his judgment, means he could do whatever he wants in his own will. This has been a constant source of confusion and concern. But in your discretion means you have to basically make a good faith judgment of what's going on. And his arguments, frankly, are so ludicrous and so improbable that they can't do it. The second point is everybody doesn't love tariffs. I can't tell you the number of people I talked to in business who said, I can't get my entire line to work because I need a key component from a foreign supplier, and nobody's making this stuff or sending it to us because of the anxiety. And so what happens is you have many, many businesses which are in limbo. They don't know what they're going to do now for the holiday season and so forth. And to say that all these people are rejoicing in the fact that America is going to be made worse off by a set of tariffs, which is so insane in terms of their structure, is simply not a plausible argument.
All right, let me offer a argument in defense and see what you think. So, so first of all, let's just set aside whether the tariffs are good public policy or not, because that's not material. What's material here is whether the president has the power, right?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, the two are related.
Okay, but well, they're related in terms of purpose and effect, I suppose. Yes, but I mean, but fundamentally, is this a power that resides within the executive branch under these national emergencies or unusual and extraordinary threats? And then you get into the definition of what's an unusual and extraordinary threat. So let's say that the argument is, well, one, the fentanyl argument he makes, which is imperiling the lives, these cartels and drug traffickers imperiling the lives of Americans. And secondly, he would say, well, we don't have rare earths. We don't have the ability to manufacture life-saving drugs the way that we need. The dependency we have on foreign countries for things that are integral to our national security. You could argue energy as well. We need to be energy independent. And basically, the argument would be that sort of like the War Production Act, where a president can come in and repurpose manufacturing infrastructure for specific war needs. I'm repurposing our trade policy for the specific needs of providing for the energy independence, the border security and security from cartels and drug traffickers, and the necessity we need to be self-sufficient when it comes to medicines, and that is all in America's national security interests, thus the unusual and extraordinary threats that I'm addressing.
Well, I think that's completely incorrect if you look at the particular cases. Now, one of the things that the president did was to impose a 39% tariff on Switzerland. Now, is this related to border security with methanol? Is this related to fentanyl in any other kind of way? Mm-hmm. Is this related to the production of Earl oil? It's related to none of these things. So what does the president do? It's absolutely counterproductive. If you want to make sure that you get rare earths from China, the last thing you want to do is to get into a war so that they announce they're not going to deliver anything to you. And in addition, the way to handle these things is domestically. So you're talking about the energy stuff. I'm pretty much in agreement with what Trump has done in trying to unleash American energy. You get rid of domestic regulations, you could produce huge amounts of stuff, you could export lots of stuff and so forth. So there's utterly no reason to use a system of tariffs which don't achieve the end when they're domestic ways in which to deal with these particular problems. So I think, in effect, what's happened is he announces there are a series of problems in the world, but there's absolutely no causal connection between the tariffs on the one hand and the amelioration of those things. Everything that he's talking about is something done domestically better. So if the United States has a lot of rare earths underneath some land which is rich with other kinds of natural virtues, are you trying to make an accommodation so you can dig it out? And he's willing to do that because he's completely reshaped correctly, in my view, that stuff. So there's no causal connection whatsoever between what he's doing and what's happening. If anything, the causal argument goes the other way. Everything he has done has made things worse in all of those dimensions.
Well, so let me continue to play devil's advocate here. I feel like Professor Kingsfield a little bit. What is the likelihood that the Court of Appeals could split the baby, or ultimately even the Supreme Court split the baby and say, well, in some of these circumstances, you're Switzerland example, that's clearly not a case of an unusual and extraordinary threat. But in other matters with other countries, perhaps Mexico, perhaps China, there's a more plausible case to be made there, and have the High Court ultimately provide some more definition to what constitutes an unusual or extraordinary threat, and essentially suggest that that some of what Trump has done fits the definition or some sort of test they come up with, and other things he's done does not.
Well, the correct answer to that is to strike all this stuff down and say to the president, you know what the requirements are. You come up with a second set of tariffs that will do this. I don't think any court wants to go through every one of these particular tariffs and deals. I think what they want to say, start again from square one, and if you have these objectives, do it. And if there is some reasonable relationship between what you want to do and an identifiable majority, you can. But what you cannot do is to make the ripping off argument when it turns out that every one of these transactions is positive sum. The buyers win and the seller win. And the reason we have international trade agreements instead of unilateral action is that the deficits all sort of cancel out when it's this market, the next market, and the next market. I'm a winner in one and a loser in the other. But there are very few people who sell back in same quantities from the people whom they buy, which is why the local deficits are important in particular cases, but utterly irrelevant to national policy. And there isn't a single shred of evidence that deficits have the kind of effect that he wants. The man lives with his own economics, which he's not allowed to have. And so what he has to do is come up with some rather specific stuff. And the question is, how much deference do you give then? I think the answer is a respectable amount of deference if he's narrowed the playing field so it's just not wildly overclaimed. Understand that everything he has done is so far beyond what was done in the one case where tariffs were imposed, where you had Iran engaged in all sorts of illegal activities, and then you're trying to figure out a response. But in this case, he can't charge any single country with whom we did business with any kind of illegal activity, nor any of the transactions that are talked about illegal. Everything that's been going on here is perfectly copacetic, except for Trump's intervention.
Well, it seems to me, though, well, I mean, there certainly have been indictments against Chinese Communist Party apparatchiks, Chinese nationals, for intellectual piracy and the like. I mean, so
absolutely correct.
Yes. So yes, and so it seems to me like. So on the one hand, you're talking about the microtransactions, the transactions between voluntary parties, economic transactions, how it actually works. On the other hand, the framing of this, and this is where I think a lot of people get lost or engage in this conflation. The framing of it is that, America is a corporation that trades with France, which is a corporation that trades with Britain, which is a corporation. And I agree with you. That's not the way to look at it. But I'm just saying, so you have this sort of macro framework that countries are like big companies. They're monoliths. And that's how economies work, or at least that's how trade policy should be made at that level, rather than, I'm trading individual entrepreneur in Chicago with an individual entrepreneur in Paris, and that's how the international economy actually works.
Well, the international economy does not work on these aggregates, and the simplest way to say it is the entire economy would come to a fall if France had to sell every good made by French manufacturers and the United States had to sell every good made by American manufacturers.
Right.
The WTO was put together for one reason only. They realized that they're not multilateral deals. As the primary mechanism, you'll never get orderly reduction in tariffs. And the stuff that was done first under the GATT, the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, and then into the WTO, resulted in a remarkable improvement of this situation. The person who's sending it back in the other direction is Trump. And let's go one simple point. Before he started with these shenanigans, the basic trade tariffs were around 2.5%, 3%, which gets lost in the wash. Now he's got them up to 15% everywhere, and the higher the tax and the more discriminatory the tax, the greater the negative impact on the economy. It hasn't been hit yet because the simple reason is other things he's done have been right, and because people don't know whether or not he's going to blink yet again. But if he really wants to make good with this, you're going to see a massive contraction in business in the United States, because the most important thing to understand about Trump is he hasn't given a single explanation as a matter of public theory why we're better off, other than his slogans about being ripped off all the time, which is just slang.
Well, he has. You're talking. He's all this money that we've realized from the tariffs, and I mean, so much.
That's not a correct argument.
Well,
you make money from tariffs, but you lose money in terms of the production of the American firms that don't have the goods they need.
Well, I understand, but I understand, but you have to allow him to make the arguments. He is making that specific argument, and so much so that Senator Josh Hawley's proposed legislation for a $600 rebate based on the tax money realized from the taxes, the tariffs imposed. So I understand your argument on what the net impact is, but that's an argument in counter to the argument that he's making. He's also making the argument that I'm getting all this direct foreign investment that I'm negotiating from. From
like two arguments against.
Well, wait a second. Wait. So I'm bringing in all this direct foreign investment. I'm lowering trade barriers for American sectors, even as I'm increasing them maybe on some foreign trading partners. So there are some net benefits for.
There always are some net benefits.
Well, okay, but
not net benefits. So he raises, let's say, $30 billion in tariffs a month. If the stock market goes down in that period by $1 trillion, it's the world's worst investment.
Yeah, but there are other variables why the markets move.
Figure out whether or not there's some kind of exchange between the two elements. The tariffs are a detail in terms of their revenue impact, that is the gain. What happens is the distortion in the markets is going to cost much, much more money for many more firms. And the longer this goes on, the more difficult it's going to become. You just look at one company after another saying, we can't do what we need to do because we can't get the stuff. Mr. Vance has suggested, quite foolishly, I might add, we'll build up American capacity. The time it takes to start a new facility to compete with an existing one is 3 or 4 years. And in the interim, what are people supposed to do? He cannot simply say that here's a huge net loss, and I can show you a little gain over here that justifies the rest of it. And that's what he's trying to do in this particular case. And it will boomerang. He's saying that people, in fact, like this situation. He has no evidence whatsoever for that. Every business person I talk to has exactly the opposite reaction. I have gratuitous uncertainty, which is a cost, and I have no idea how I'm going to be able to get out of it because I don't know what this man is going to do this week or next week. And if he drops this whole thing, the market will go up. If he really starts to enforce it, there'll be retaliation by other tariffs on other parties. Businesses will start to go down. This is an integrated world economy in which most of our outputs are dependent upon foreign inputs. He doesn't seem to understand that. And what he's doing is proposing a road to ruin, using his slang about everybody being ripped off in a series of prosperous transactions. That cannot be an argument for what he's doing. It is really lamentable. The former Trump used to talk silly, but didn't do it. The current Trump is talking silly and acting silly.
Professor Richard Epstein, James Parker Hall, Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of Law and Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago. Professor Epstein, thank you for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to do battle with you.
Yes, an honor. Thank you, sir. And Richard Epstein joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Success is picking up extra shifts for your family. Now you want to be the boss. Success is getting your foot in the door. Now you want to take the next step. Success looks different to everyone.